the social classes. What else did we talk about?
The 14-year-old emperor.
Yeah, but I'm talking about changes. Like what changes were made. Yep, so we've got that. We've got the fact that the social classes are now abolished. What else?
The fact that they had to take part in the military, each person.
Yep, that's part of the National Army. Yep, there's conscription, universal conscription.
They promised to create a parliament.
Yep, they promised to create a parliament, which at this point they haven't done yet. We're just kind of waiting. Yeah.
They moved the imperial capital to Tokyo and renamed it Kyoto.
Yes. Tokyo. Yes, they moved the imperial capital, and this is important. They moved the imperial capital to Edo and renamed it Tokyo, or Eastern Capital. Okay, so let's look at some other changes. In 1871, they unified the monetary and tax systems. When I say this, remember that the tax systems and monetary systems had been controlled primarily by the individual daimyo up until this point. So there wasn't, like, while there was national currency, it wasn't very well tracked. And you know, exchange rates, while they had, the Tokugawa shogunate early in the empire had tried to establish like universal trade rates, it didn't go very well toward the end. And so this is kind of a reconsolidation of all of that and making sure the taxes are all collected by the emperor, because things had kind of fallen apart toward the end of the shogunate. In 1872, we get universal education. What's weird about this universal education, at first at least, is there's an emphasis put on Western learning. So when I say Western learning, I mean English and the Greek and Roman alphabet, okay, and Greek and Roman history and European history. So it's kind of bizarre that there's this like emphasis put on the West, when up until this point, the West has had very little influence on Japan. But that's what the children are learning about. But there is universal education. So Japan's already high literacy rate is even higher after this.
And this is where they like beat majority of countries in literacy rate.
Yes. All the changes that happened during the Meiji Restoration set Japan up to be leaps and bounds above every other country in the world in education and technology. Yeah.
So in the picture,
What are they learning? They're learning kana, actually, in that picture. So they're teaching like a modern script. Mm-hmm. I was trying to figure out the same thing, and then I got to looking at it, and I was like, oh, it's kana. Yeah.
Are there still like different like languages? Like there's a fancy language in it.
Oh yeah, those still exist today. Those three alphabets are still in use today. In the same sentence, you might have kanji, katakana, and hiragana.
Well, I meant like, do the people that are richer?
Everybody's learning all of them.
Oh.
Yeah. Because remember that those languages are used for different things. Like you use kanji when you're talking about things that are historical and specifically Chinese that don't have a name in Japanese. And then there's hiragana, which is specific to Japan. And then katakana, which is the Japanese version of the Chinese things. So depending on what you're trying to describe, you use any of the three and maybe all three in the same sentence. Yeah.
Was the education like very intertwined with church, like, you know?
No, completely removed from the churches actually, which is weird because that's not normal, right? Usually education, especially education in the Middle Ages, is done primarily by the church or by monks or anything else, especially in Europe. And this has removed education from religion and placed it in the hands of the state. So it's universal education like we think of universal education, like it's a public paid for enterprise that everyone has a right to. So it's very much like that. Okay?
Did they take that from Western?
No.
They made it up.
Well, I mean, it was sort of.
So like
Kind of happened at the same time.
What I'm asking is, who was the one who's like said education should be offered to everyone?
That's what I'm saying, though. There's not a clear answer to that. It happened about the same time. Yeah. So it's something that everybody worldwide was sort of pushing toward and moving toward, but there's no like one clear-cut answer as to who the originator was. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's something the West was starting and Japan was already starting, and then they just kind of came to the conclusion around the same time. Okay. Okay, in 1873, we had the agricultural tax reform, which streamlines agricultural production and provides the emperor with a steady revenue stream. So it kind of, essentially what that one does is it pays for the first one. So it's an odd thing to talk about, but you know, agriculture had not been doing well up until this point, especially at the end of the Tokugawa shogunate. So this was the emperor's chance to kind of take control back from the daimyo. He's already abolished all of the individual domains and, you know, reestablished prefecture lines. And so now he's in control of all agricultural production once again, like way back when. And so that money's coming in. There's a reason why it's called a restoration. Yes.
The universal education is a little bit off track.
It's okay.
It makes me think about how Oklahoma got universal pre-K when the United States it just got snuck into a bill. It just makes me laugh every time.
It's a very strange thing. Like that kind of stuff happens all the time. It's very rare that education is the bill itself. It's usually just kind of like slipped in. Yeah, kind of under the radar. Right. You're like, oh, like what? Whoa, yeah. In the mid 1870s, things start to get a little bit not great, right? People are, you know, some people are excited about these changes and others are like, this is way too much, way too fast. And so there's some opposition kind of on the rise. Specifically amongst the samurai class, there's a large number of disgruntled samurai that begin to participate in several rebellions against the central government. Most notably, the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. This one is very famous. It's actually very small, but very famous. It's important to note, and this should be pretty obvious, that none of these rebellions are successful, right? Like that should be pretty obvious considering the time frame here. Questions so far? I'll give you a second. Looks like several of you are still writing. Huh?
Kind of weird to think about when this actually.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the context of in world history of when this occurs, it's in an odd time period.
Because, like, in my mind, I hear about what's happening and I think about it being so long ago. This is after the Civil War.
It's post Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 10 years, 12 years post Civil War.
I just figured out that the Civil War was like the most lives lost ever in the United States in a war, like ever in any American war.
Is that true?
So Schlesinger said that the Civil War lost
It might have been
the most lives out of any American war.
I don't know that that's
Most
true.
American lives, because it was only like.
I mean, that would make sense because the only lives lost were American lives, but
because World War II was during like the last couple of years.
it's not by much.
Yeah.
Because, maybe.
Wasn't good, at least.
No, it was terrible regardless. But I thought there was one that trumped it recently. We'll go there. Okay, guys, hey. Shh. Are we ready? Yes? Okay. So, the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. This is a samurai uprising centering around the Satsuma clan of southern Kyushu. This is just going to give you an overview here, and then we're going to go in depth. Why they were upset? They were reluctant to give up their status and power. They believed that only samurai had the courage and training to defend Japan from its enemies. And this is pretty much true of, these two things are pretty much true of all of the samurai rebellions around this time. And because of these beliefs and the imperial government encroaching on Satsuma territory, which I'll explain in a second, in 1877, the samurai of the Satsuma clan rose up to challenge the authority of the Restoration government in Tokyo, and then this is really the first test of the new civilian army. It's gonna blink, so sorry.
There are lots of civil wars in this
Oh yeah.
country.
So basically, it's people who were raised as samurai and people who were trained to fight.
Yeah. Guys,
How long is this period?
not long. Huh?
Is it a really big, like, long
No,
period?
it's very short. This period is 1868 to 1912.
Oh,
It's very short.
And Oklahoma was like founded during this period.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's really weird. Like, my great grandpa, I think, was born in 18, like, late 1880.
Yeah.
Maybe 1801. I don't know. It's weird to think about how.
This is very recent, and there were samurai. Let's be
Yeah.
very clear. Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
Now, granted, this is it for them. They will die after this. We getting close? So, some of you are still writing. I'll give you a second. Good? Ready? Okay. So, who were the Satsuma? This is important to establish before we talk about why they were really upset. They were a clan from the southern tip of Kyushu. That red area is where the Satsuma are from, and that is their mon, the white circle with the white cross on a black field there. Now, this is Kyushu, and remember that Kyushu is pretty far away, and a lot of times, like, it's difficult when you have a central government in Kyoto, let alone in Edo, to kind of control something this far west, right? So they had governed themselves for centuries, and they weren't too keen on being governed by anyone else. At the end of the Tokugawa period, they could tell that things were about to change, and so the Satsuma began to invest in armaments. They created a new shipyard, they built 2 weapons factories, and they built 3 ammunition depots. They knew that something bad was coming, essentially. So they started to stock up specifically on Western weaponry. And one of the very first things that the imperial government did when, the Meiji government was established was they took all of the domains and redistributed the lines, right? So the daimyos didn't have any real power. However, because they were so far away, specifically from the capital, the Satsuma pretty much remained in control of all the day-to-day operations, just like they had for centuries. Okay, so everybody's like, really, the shogun's in control, or really, the emperor's in control. But in Kyushu, because they were so far removed from the capitals, regardless of where they were, they had been ruling themselves for quite some time. So they're like, okay, we have a new ruler. No, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And they did not take kindly to others encroaching on their territory.
just was thinking about like a lot of the fighting here is taking place, just with swords.
Mm-hmm.
And this is after when people were fighting already with like the forget what they call it, but in the Civil War there was a couple ships that were coated in iron and ironclads. That's what I was
Mm-hmm.
And like imagine if one of those versus an army of people dudes with swords.
Right. It's exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah,
It's 100% what we're dealing with. Yeah.
That's not fine.
It's not, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly what it is. We'll get there.
I like how a lot of this is happening because they're like, you guys can't protect Japan. Let's kill each other. So
Yeah.
it's like,
Mhm.
hey,
Let's see if
we
you can
gotta have,
really protect
we
it.
have to have the army that's best for our country to protect from others. So
Right.
let's kill each other until we're all dead.
Right.
Not the
If we're not in charge,
no one's in charge.
We ready? No? I heard a no. Give me a second. Ready? I don't hear a ton of typing or writing, so sure, let's keep going. Okay, so in the beginning, January 30th, 1877, the central government launches a raid on arms and ammunition storage in Kagoshima. Kagoshima is the main port that is owned by the Satsuma. It's where they had built all of those things that we talked about in the previous slide. Their intent was to confiscate weapons and take them to the Imperial Arsenal in Osaka. The Satsuma were not given any warning for obvious reasons. The federal government knew that they probably weren't going to give the weapons and ammunition over without a fight, so they figured it was best for them to sneak in and take it. However, the people in the town are not loyal to the imperial government. They are loyal to the Satsuma. So when the raiding party reaches the arsenal in the early hours of the morning, the locals raise the alarm and over 1,000 Satsuma samurai arrive and kill or drive off the sailors. They then go on to attack imperial facilities in the area and seize weapons, parading them around in the streets as a show of force against the new imperial army. So there's a lot of posturing going on here. What do I mean by that?
Basically, they're trying to show that the government can't stop them.
Exactly. They're saying, that's cute, try again, basically. And they figure they kind of are taking a really risky bargain here in that they figure if the imperial government needs their weaponry, then they don't have a lot of their own, which is incorrect. But that's
Not bad reason.
yeah, that's what they were banking on. It is good reasoning. It's solid reasoning. But the problem is there's a lot of other daimyo who are willingly giving up their weapons at the same time that this is occurring. So it doesn't end up holding true.
It's not.
Right.
I've gotten really good at spelling samurai.
I bet.
I'd be better at spelling the Japanese from hearing.
Do what?
I'm better at spelling Japanese from just like hearing it alone.
Yeah. How are we doing? Okay? I still see some writing. I'll give you a sec. Oh, that's a terrible picture. I don't like it. Ready? Yes? Okay. So, we have some escalation that occurs here. The Satsuma commander, Takamori Saigo, he's a big deal, so you definitely need to know his name, was not in the area when this occurred. So he's initially super upset with his, lower samurai, and he's like, why in the world would you attack the imperial government? What are you doing? And then he realizes, it comes to his attention, that the imperial army and the emperor himself had actually put a hit out on Saigo himself, saying that if the Satsuma do not willingly hand over the weapons, find him and kill him. So he changes his tune, and he's like, okay, now we're done. So on February 13th and 14th, 1877, I'm giving you very specific dates because you need to know how quickly this escalates and how short of a time span this occurs in. Satsuma's domain army, so the army of the original domain, remember the domains have been abolished, but he doesn't really care. He still has loyalty of an army of about 12,900 soldiers. They organize themselves into units. Each man is armed with a small firearm, 100 rounds of ammunition because they are short on ammunition, and his katana because they are samurai after all. February 15th, 1877, the advance guard of about 4,000 soldiers set out marching north. And they're followed 2 days later by the rear guard and the artillery unit, who actually left in the middle of a freak snowstorm, and so a lot of their artillery froze on the way, and so they were already short artillery at the very beginning. Not a great start. They're Western firearms.
So they were using
So yeah, they were using like repeaters and revolvers and stuff.
Yes, but also like shotguns and rifles, and yes. Mostly rifles, actually. What they consider small firearms are rifles, and I find that very strange. They kept saying small firearms, and I was like a pistol? And then I'd look at it, and they're like, no, a rifle. I'm like, that's not small. What are you talking about? But what they mean by that is not like a Gatling gun, which they were also using, or, things like that.
So they were using relative sized parts.
Right. What they mean by that is personal weapons, not large multi-person operators. Does that make sense? Okay, guys, hey, you ready?
Is it small?
Then why are you talking?
Is it small in general, or is it small in comparison to?
That's why. Yeah. So it took me a while to figure out that what they meant by small firearm when I was reading it was that one person could operate it by themselves. Not what I was anticipating.
That's not usually what you mean by
I was thinking like small, i.e. able to conceal it. No, that's not what they meant at all.
Picture
Right. Right. I was very confused. I was like, I don't understand. Questions on this? Okay, I'll give you a little bit of time.
looks very surprised in that picture.
Yeah, that's Saigo. He looks like Alfred Molina. He's an actor. I saw him and went, interesting. Alfred Molina is definitely Spanish, not Japanese, but we're just
It's
going
like
with
an
it.
actual picture.
Yes. Photography was developed during the Civil War.
I know, it's just weird.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, we're gonna have photographs from here on out, guys. There's also prints and stuff like that, but photography was invented roughly around the time of the start of the Civil War. So,
Roughly around the vacuum period.
yeah, exactly. Like they would have come with cameras. They were large and took a really long time to process, but they were there. Mostly just done for portraiture. It's not like you could do, yeah.
Just sails up to Japan, says, hey, check this out.
Look.
Like,
Right. Are we ready?
they would immediately think that's some sort of weapon.
Okay, so first attack. Tokyo fully suspects that Saigo and his army are either going to dig in and defend the Satsuma lands or attack Tokyo by sea, because those are the safest and most logical routes. He does neither. He marches straight through central Kyushu, hoping to, raise samurai from other daimyo along the way. And he does. However, so this is initial path. Let me try and figure this out. This is Kagoshima. This is the bay that they had initially attacked. So they start here, and this is the first march, just straight up Kyushu. Okay, but there's this castle here, Kunamoto Castle, that's in the way. Okay, this is a government garrison, specifically an imperial garrison, that's manned with about 3,800 soldiers and 600 imperial police. So Saigo, being the samurai that he is, attacks it. February 22nd, 1877. Direct attack on Kumamoto Castle.
I'm starting to realize that he might not be the smartest person.
He is mad. And that's literally all that's driving him. And he's scared. Let's be very clear. Like, his entire way of life is being threatened. And his actual life is being threatened because the imperial government's put a hit out on him.
Yeah, he literally had no choice in
Yeah.
saying that from
At that point, what's frustrating about this is, had the imperial government gone to him and said, let's work together to, run these, he probably would have said no problem. Because he was really upset when he gets back and he finds out that his men had attacked the imperial officials. He's like, you guys are all idiots. This is going to get us all killed. And then he finds out about this hit on him. And he's like, well, guess I don't have any other choice. I have to attack them because they are actively trying to kill me.
Yeah, he was just like, well, that's a little bit over.
And the hit was put out before his men rebelled. So that's important. Girls, stop.
So yeah, he was just like, oh, come on, you're overreacting, it's fine. We'll try to.
Right. And then they're like, by the way, here's, yeah. They want your head, literally.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, you know how this works. It's no different.
I'm still thinking about like Nobunaga. Like, oh, this wasn't that long. After Nobunaga, it was very long after.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last one, a couple hundred years ago, like that.
You know, it sounded like Immortal or something.
Yeah.
Like what?
Immortal.
You ready? Yes? Okay. So, Kumamoto Castle. February 22nd, like I said, the attack begins. The samurai scale the walls repeatedly. Like any castle, they have large, thick walls, okay? And they are repeatedly gunned down by the firearms at the top. They continue this very destructive, for them, line of attack for 2 straight days. Until Saigo is like, we are losing too many men, let's lay siege on the castle instead. What's siege?
They close off all outside help and they just wait for them.
Exactly. They surround them and cut off any reinforcements and just wait them out. Basically try and starve them. The siege lasts until April 12th, 1877. So we have a couple months. Many of the samurai surrounding this castle, in the area surrounding this castle, joined Saigo's army, and his numbers reach about 20,000 at this point. So a little less than double what he had. However, the Imperial Army throughout this 2-month period sends around 45,000 soldiers as reinforcements. And there's no way that Saigo's army, even at the size it is at this point, can withstand that. So they are finally driven away. And they leave.
I always think it's cool when like we learn about a certain like war or battle or something,
Uh-huh.
and it's the day of or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
Like you could, if they have to the day, you can actually go and compare like what other historical things happened. in
Yeah.
the town.
Is it gold gilded or is that just fancy lighting?
It's gold and fancy lighting. A little bit of both. The bottom layers are actually white, but the top layers have gold. Does that mean it's hard to see the difference in that light?
So wait, they went for 2 days straight climbing walls to get shot at.
Just constantly getting shot down. Yeah.
I feel like somebody had to go on to like, hey, why are we doing this?
Right. You know that people were eventually like, come on.
We keep not changing.
Guys, shh. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, hush.
No one should go over the wall. So they're all about. What should we do? Send more people.
Keep going. That's basically what they did. It's a really strange thing because usually the samurai are a lot more,
Smart, not stupid.
right, a lot more, I don't know, cunning than that. And this is just really, I mean, you can tell that they're motivated by fear and that they are literally at their last ditch effort to survive.
I'm pretty sure
It is sad.
pretty sure as soon as borders open, no one left.
A lot of people did, but a lot of people didn't have the means to leave.
Yeah.
Like most people didn't have the means to leave. The samurai especially, I mean, they didn't have any money. They'd been, poor for a really long time at this point. So they literally didn't have anywhere to go.
Weren't they like only alive because they lived with their like daimyo?
Right. And now that their daimyo don't have any real power, they're like, well, now what do we do? Yeah. Okay, guys, we ready?
How many Ronin do you think would be in that like?
Quite a few. There's going to be a lot of Ronin because basically everybody that's joining the rebellion from the outside areas that they're going through, those are going to be Ronin because their leaders are either dead or on the side of the Imperial Army. Okay, questions so far? All right, so we're here. This is Kumamoto Castle. They are fleeing, okay? Going down through this area. The next time that we're going to talk about is when they hit right here, okay? So they march south for about 7 days, and they land roughly here and or here, okay? Okay. And they dig trenches and await the arrival of the Imperial Army. So this is actually here where they dig in. The Imperial Army catches up with them, obviously, and they can't, there's about 45,000 or about 30,000 roughly at this point, and they just cannot hold on. So they end up getting pushed back. And this whole area, this area right here, this is areas with pro-Saigo guerrilla activity, meaning they leave little groups of samurai as they go to attack the forces on their route. So they're actually like shedding parts of their army to slow the Imperial Army down. Okay, and then they reach here by July. So there's a bunch of brief altercations throughout this entire time. Satsuma is constantly in retreat, being chased essentially by the Satsuma army. When they get here, the Imperial Army manages to encircle them in July. Saigo is able to fight his way out, but the casualties are heavy. Tens of thousands lost. So the Satsuma forces are now on the run, and they're suffering heavy casualties along the way. So they get encircled here, and now they're literally just bouncing around running. They start eventually running north. There's a major battle that we'll talk about next here. And then the last battle is right back where they started. Shiroyama Castle is right next to Kagoshima. Yeah.
On the second paragraph, it says Setsuma and Satsuma.
It's A. I don't know why it's like that. It really likes to correct things occasionally. Yeah, it's Satsuma, not Setsuma. I'll change it before I post it. Questions? Ready? No? Okay. Now we ready? Yes? Great. So, Mount Inodake, they are down to 3,000 men. So this 20,000 man army has dwindled over the last month or so to about 3,000. And they make a stand, what they think will be their final stand, turns out it's not, on Mount Inodake on August 19th, 1877. At this point, this is the slopes of a relatively low mountain. They are faced with 21,000 imperial troops. And when this happens, the majority of the rebels kneel down and commit seppuku rather than be captured.
That's really sad.
It's super sad. This whole situation is really sad. I mean, they are literally pushing the samurai who have been slowly dwindling and losing their power over the last couple hundred years into a corner where it's either conform or die, and they won't do that because think about what they stand for, right? They will never conform. That is literally the antithesis of their way of life. So it was inevitable that they were all going to die, which is super sad to watch it happen.
It's like that's what you think about when you think of like Japan.
Yeah. This is a intentional extermination of the older Japanese way of life.
So this like group of 20,000 chase these guys into the mountain and watch like thousands of men just kill themselves.
They turn around to face off, kneel down, kill themselves. Yeah, I mean that was unsettling, needless to say. And a lot of these people knew them, like they know each other. It's not like these are strangers. So their survivors had to rely only on their swords as they were completely out of ammunition at this point. Out of the 3,000 men that go into this battle, only 400 or 500 escape, including Saigo. So we started with about 13,000. The army swelled to about 20,000. And then by the time we get here, which is August, it started in January, we're down to 3. And we leave this battle with 400 to 500. This is around the number of students that I serve in a year. Yeah. It's weird when you start thinking about it and contextualizing it in things that matter for your life. Like, it's significantly smaller, less than half of your guys' class size.
Yeah, our class size is like 1,000.
Close to 1,000.
There's only 400 or 500.
Okay. You ready? So these remaining 400 to 500 retreat to Mount Shirayama, which is right next to where the whole thing started. When I say right next to, I mean like 3 miles away. There's a castle at Mount Shirayama. In the final battle, called the Battle of Shirayama, 30,000 Imperial troops face about 450 samurai. And this gives you the idea of the power, who have no ammunition, by the way. They only have their katana. They're injured, they're tired, they've been marching for months. It's not looking good. However, the Imperial Army arrives on September 8, 1877, our birthday. And they did not attack until 2 weeks later. This speaks volumes. With those numbers, you'd think that they would just charge head in. But there's so much respect for the samurai's military prowess that they took 2 weeks with 30,000 men against 450 to plan this out, because they were afraid that they might be able to pull something off. I mean, think about the couple times in Japanese history where a group of 300 or 400 have beat a much larger group. It's happened several times. So they're like, we'll wait.
How they actually learned from them.
I know, right? You're like, shocking. They did something. They thought about it for once. This is why we study history.
They started with the school.
Yeah. On September 24th at 3 o'clock in the morning, the Emperor's troops launch a 3-hour artillery barrage on the remaining samurai, followed by a massive infantry assault. All 30,000 at once.
That's not as.
At 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning. At 6 a.m., they launch their infantry assault. Saigo is killed during the initial barrage. The legend actually says that he was gravely injured and then commits seppuku, and then his second in command decapitated him, because, you know, there's these certain things, like things have to be done to be considered an honorable death. And so he was following orders. We don't know what actually happened. It's almost certain that he was killed in the initial barrage, and then his second in command decapitated him, so it looked like he had committed seppuku and done the whole thing. But either way, wanted to make sure he had an honorable death. The remaining samurai, instead of committing seppuku, charged directly into the Imperial Army's gunfire. And by 7 a.m., all Satsuma samurai are dead. No one survives this. Not a single soldier. Yeah, you're welcome on a Monday. So sorry.
So it's just like 300, 400 dudes running down that hill.
What does this sound like to you in Western history? No. There's another battle where a much smaller group faces a much larger group and everybody dies. No. Nope. It's not an American event. It's much older. We're talking like 300 or 400 BCE.
Oh, I don't know.
Is it Greek?
It is Greek. What?
Greeks and Romans?
It's Greeks. Romans are not involved. It's
Is it
no.
the war with Spartans and Athenians?
It's the war with Spartans and the Persians, and there's a specific battle. They've made many comic books and movies on it. There are 300 soldiers, in fact.
Oh.
Yeah, 300 men.
Yeah, it's called the Battle of Thermopylae. You should maybe know this. It's a big event in Western history. Guys, shh. And it's where 300 Spartans managed to hold off the entire Persian army of 200,000 for weeks because they were very smart in terms of that. This often gets compared to that, but really there's no comparison because they didn't hold anybody off. They literally just died. Yeah. The Battle of Thermopylae. Yeah. If you are interested in military history, it's one that you definitely should know. The movie 300 is obviously based on that. It's the 300 Spartans. That is a very Hollywood version of it. But you essentially get the gist of it. This also has a movie that is largely inaccurate, but they get the gist. It's not Keanu Reeves. This time it's Tom Cruise. Yeah, even better. In 2003, came out around the same time too. In 2003, there was a movie called The Last Samurai. And it is about Tom Cruise's character, who's an American military commander who goes to Japan to train the troops, which did happen. Like that kind of thing happened all the time.
Tom Cruise isn't a samurai.
No, luckily he is playing an American. He is not playing a Japanese person because, dear God, no.
It's like one of my dad's favorite movies.
Yeah, it's very inaccurate, but that's about this event. They call it the Satsuma Rebellion at the end, but all of the names are changed. Like Ken Watanabe's character is technically Saigo, but they changed his name. So yeah, big deal. They do have Japanese actors in the movie, so it's not like atrocious like 47 Ronin. But it's a very condensed version of this event. So it is worth a watch. Yeah.
You know what I really wanted to happen in that movie? I know it didn't happen. But if Tom Cruise was like sailing to it and it just started playing Danger Zone.
Yeah, no, that would be horrible. There is maybe one of the saddest scenes in any movie ever is all of them running into the gunfire at the very end. It is horrific, but it is very accurate as to what would have occurred. Yeah. There weren't any Americans with them, though. Tom Cruise is with them at that end, and you're like, no. Yeah, it's very strange. Guys, we got one more slide. So the aftermath of this. The end of the Satsuma Rebellion marks the official end of the samurai era in Japan. And in fact, the carrying of a katana is officially banned by the emperor following this event.
Wait, even now?
Even now. Takamori Saigo is made legend by the Japanese people. He is beloved. This is one of the statues. There are hundreds of statues of him all over the country, specifically in Kyushu for obvious reasons. He was so loved that 2 years later, Emperor Meiji issued him a posthumous pardon in 1889. Yes?
By carrying the katana, you can't carry it on like the street. You can have one at your home though.
You can have one at home, but yeah, you cannot carry it on your person.
So it's like you can only get
Right. They are purely like heirlooms at this point, passed down from family to family, but you cannot carry one out in public. This event signals the Japanese Imperial Army's rise to domination in Eastern Asia. This showed that an army of individual civilians could conquer even the most trained warriors, given the right equipment and training. And this rise would not stop until Japan's defeat by the Americans in World War II. So, I mean, this sets off a large chain of events that gets very aggressive. The Japanese will go on to defeat the Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians before World War II occurs. Yes, they beat them at home. It is intense. One of the only